Right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, depending on where you are. My name is David McCoy. I'm the Evidence to Policy Lead here at the International Institute for Global Health, which is part of the United Nations University. I have a background in medicine and academic public health. And on this webinar, I'm joined by 5 members of the independent group of experts that we convened to assess the problematic aspects of global university rankings and to make recommendations for how the problems caused by global university rankings may be mitigated. Next slide, please. Now, just a few words about UNU first. Although we're called a university, UNU is mostly set up to act as a think tank within the UN system. It's headquartered in Tokyo and consists of 13 different institutes in different countries working on different issues. I'm part of the International Institute of Global Health, which obviously focuses on a portfolio of work concerning global health. And a core part of our mandate is to ensure that global health programs, systems, and policies take account of the particular needs of countries and populations in the global south, and to also challenge policies and practices that give inappropriate and unfair preference to wealthy countries and populations in the global north, such as we saw with the unequal access to vaccines during the COVID pandemic. Next slide, please. So as part of this broad portfolio of work, in February of this year, we published a briefing paper about the biases and coloniality related to global university rankings, including drawing attention to some of their particularly harmful effects on the practice of public health across the world. We then convened an independent expert group to examine the issue further. And after several conversations amongst the group, a statement was produced and published earlier this month. I'm now going to introduce our panel of IEG members and then hand over to them to present the statement. First, we have Akosua Adomako-Ampofo, who is Professor of African and Gender Studies at the Institute of African Studies in the University of Ghana, whose areas of interest include African knowledge systems, higher education, race and identity politics, and gender relations. She's the director of the University of Ghana's Center for Gender Studies and Advocacy and its Institute of African Studies. She's also the founding vice president and immediate past president of the African Studies Association and current editor-in-chief of the Contemporary Journal of African Studies. Akosua is also a member of the Council for the Development of Social Science Research in Africa and recently co-edited a book on producing inclusive feminist knowledge, positionalities and discourses in the Global South. We then have Marcelo Nobel, who is the 12th rector of the University of Campinas in Brazil, and also a professor of physics. Marcelo has held other leadership roles, including being the executive director of the University of Campinas Exploratory Science Museum and vice rector for undergraduate programs. Marcelo is also vice president of the Brazilian Physics Society, executive director of the Brazilian Nanotechnology National Laboratory, and editor-in-chief of the Journal of Magnetism and Magnetic Materials. He's a former Eisenhower Fellow, Fellow of the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation, and Lehman Fellow. Third, we have Carolyn Stevens, who is Honorary Full Professor of Global Health at the University College London Bartlett Development Planning Unit, with a joint post in the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. She's been visiting full professor at the National University of Tucumán in Argentina and is an international fellow of the Royal Society of Medicine and winner of the Royal Society Cone Award for Excellence in Science Engagement, amongst many other things. Carolyn has a long-term interest in interdisciplinary studies of equity, ethics, human rights, and sustainable development, and has lived and worked in India, Liberia, Ghana, Tanzania, Nigeria, and most recently in Argentina and Brazil. Fourth, Joshua Mok Kaho, who is Professor of Comparative Policy at Lingnan University in Hong Kong. Before that, Kaho was Vice President for Research and Development and Professor of Comparative Policy at the Education University of Hong Kong, and also the Associate Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of Hong Kong. Kaho has worked across the academic fields of sociology, political science, and public and social policy for many years, and has published extensively on comparative education policy, comparative development and policy studies, and social development in contemporary China and East Asia. Then finally, we have Ellen Hazelcorn, who is a joint managing partner at BH Associates and Professor Emeritus at the Technological University of Dublin in Ireland. Ellen is also joint editor for Policy Reviews in Higher Education and a member of the Quality Board for Icelandic Higher Education, and is on the UK Commission for the College of the Future. She's worked with multiple international organizations and governments for over 20 years on tertiary education policy, systems and institutional governance, on quality assurance systems and accreditation, and on science and research policy. She recently led a project on league tables and ranking systems as a consultant for the OECD, and has been recently appointed to advise the Irish government on developing a more unified tertiary education and research system. So we've really got a fantastic panel of speakers. After the statement is presented, we'll have opportunity for some questions from the audience and some discussion amongst the panel members as well. So with that, let me now hand over to Akosua to begin the presentation of the statement. Thanks very much. And next slide, please, Tiffany.
Hello to everyone, whatever time zone you are in. We hope that everyone is well. My name is Akosua Ampofo, as you heard. It's been a pleasure to be a part of this group. And so we will start by just underscoring the fact that, of course, higher education institutions and universities in the shape that we see them in contemporary times are very important for a number of reasons. They are important for the delivery of education and training, of course, and they are extremely important for knowledge production for a variety of players in different contexts, whether civil society organizations, whether governments. They're important for enabling us in policy practice and debates around policy and practice. They are important for independent academic inquiry, also outside the university space, and for informing public debate. Public intellectuals come from universities a lot of the time, and they can help strengthen democracy and protect human rights and serve as hubs for cultural and civic engagement. So by enabling an equitable access to higher education, universities are important sites and players for encouraging social mobility and fairness across our societies. And I am sure we have all experienced this in our families as well. And through international research and scientific collaborations locally as well as globally, universities help to promote cross-border cooperation both within country and across the entire globe, and thereby they can contribute towards creating or enhancing better cooperation, trust, and peace. And for all of these and multiple other reasons that I'm sure we can all think of, universities are vital as we seek to protect, promote, and develop these social and public interest functions that I've outlined. Next slide, please. So for the past 2 decades or so, we have seen that global university rankings have played a very large and increasingly significant role in higher education worldwide and have become extremely influential. There are dozens and dozens of university league tables and rankings that our institutions, our universities, are desperately seeking to do well on and to compete with each other. And we're constantly, saying which ones we belong to and where we ranked on them, and have made this space extremely competitive in what we can refer to as a globalized higher education market. Among these, there are a handful of very influential global ranking leaders, we might say, including those that you can see on the screen. So produced by the Times Higher Education University Rankings, the QS World University Rankings under Elsevier, and the Shanghai Rankings by consultancy. However, while these rankings have or may have incentivized some improvements in the quality of some universities, there's also a growing recognition and attention being paid to the fact that they tend to incentivize a number of what we may refer to as perverse and harmful behaviors in this competitive market, and produce systemic long-term negative effects as a result. Next slide, please. So in our statement, we summarize these under 9 headings, and I am going to be referring to 4 of them, and then I will hand over to my colleague. So the first and most fundamental problem is that it is not possible to accurately and appropriately represent the quality of different universities with diverse missions in different parts of the world. What are we ranking, and whose value system are we using in these rankings that we rely on? Because we come from very diverse social, political, and economic contexts, and single quantitative measures are not necessarily appropriate and sometimes are extremely harmful. Furthermore, any attempt to combine teaching, research, and other university functions into a single composite indicator will always be arbitrary and therefore questionable. And finally, under item problem number 1 that we articulate, constituting rankings as a zero-sum hierarchy that we're all chasing after suggests that quality higher education is in limited supply, and that no 2 universities should expect to have equal status, and that we are chasing after the higher ranked ones, and this obviously is false. Number 2, the data and methods that are used to produce these rankings are flawed. Of particular note is a heavy reliance on subjective judgments of quality made by non-representative samples of survey respondents, and on citation counts as a measure of research quality. And we know the problems around citation counts. Moreover, while there's some information about the methods used to produce rankings, neither the methodological details nor the data sets used are made publicly available, which is interesting considering that we are talking about universities, and universities do research, and research should be easily verifiable and repeatable in different contexts. So this absence prevents anyone from being able to critically evaluate the rankings and raises concerns about bias and objectivity. The third problem is that the major rankings display a bias towards research that is in the STEM category, so science, technology, engineering, and maths, and a bias towards Anglophone institutions and journals, and even a bias towards journals, and in those journals, obviously, Anglophone journals, diminishing the importance of other university functions such as teaching and improving public policy and debate, as well as neglecting or not paying sufficient attention to what is coming out of the humanities, social sciences, and from other languages. So the question becomes, what is most important in which context, in which country, if we have these biases? Furthermore, a bias towards quote-unquote cutting-edge research pulls universities away from conducting research that may be more practical and useful for a particular context, but that may not be considered to be cutting edge. So again, whose research and for what? And finally, point number 4 that I am speaking to and related to what I've just shared is the problem that these global rankings reflect perspective, standards, and traditions that favor wealthier, older, larger, and more quote-unquote research-intensive universities. And we may even ask what we mean by research. None of the major rankings control for the resources available to a university or use methods that adjust for challenging and unstable political and policy contexts. How many hours are people in different contexts putting into their work? Do we value the fact that they are working with maybe power goes out and so on? And thereby, this helps to reproduce existing inequalities and structures of privilege within and across countries and regions. Importantly, rankings can help perpetuate a self-reinforcing systems of winners and losers that works against efforts to raise standards across the board. Next slide, please. So on this slide, before we continue with the challenges that we are noting, you see some of the top dominant universities that come out of these global rankings. And obviously, most of them are situated in the quote-unquote global north. So I now hand over to my colleague Marcelo to continue. Thank you very much.
Okay, good morning from Brazil. I am speaking here from a country that is suffering now from the global warming. We are still in springtime and we are facing more than 40 degrees nowadays. So this is another issue that we should discuss very deeply in the next few years. Well, I will keep talking about the problematic issues about the rankings. So the fifth problem is that encouraging competition between individual universities can divert energy and attention away from improving the higher education sector as a whole and harnessing competition amongst universities to address societal challenges collectively. Also, but by judging all universities according to the same universal set of performances measures, global universities rankings work towards homogenizing the sector and diminishing the autonomy of universities to determine priorities that are more needs and context-based. The sixth problem is that the frequent and regular publication of university league tables, usually are published every year, creates an environment of constant pressure that consumes vast amounts of scarce resources and creates a short-termism that leads to neglect of deeper and longer-term goals. This, in turn, lead to a state of constant anxiety and stress within universities, as well as excessive corporate branding and excessive attention paid to certain metrics, as well as engaging in data manipulation and fabrication, and other forms of cheating or gaming. All this comes at the detriment of the quality of teaching, staff well-being, and student learning. Next slide, please. The eighth problem is that the major global rankers are primarily private businesses whose interest in higher education is driven or at least strongly influenced by the need to maximize profit. This effectively aligns rankers with the major academic publishing companies that are also powerful profit-maximizing actors in higher education, and which have in recent decades also transitioned into firms that trade in data. The extraction of data, the creation of anxiety about rankings, so that there is a demand for their analytics and consultancy service are at the heart of the business model that ultimately diverts resources away from core academic functions and places universities and governments with limited budgets at even more disadvantages. The major global rankers are clearly in position of conflict of interest, which is not being adequately managed. While there is nothing wrong with engaging with business in principle, the absence of transparency, accountability, and public scrutiny is deeply concerning. Thank you. I will hand over to the next presenter, please.
Thank you very much, Marcelo. I think my colleagues have already given you some idea of the scale of the problem that we are facing. And as Marcelo has just said, we are in a context now of a globalized system in which we've got major global environmental change occurring, which is hitting every single country, particularly countries in the South. And as academics, we all have a responsibility to try and improve the situation we're in and start to reverse some of these inequalities. And I think one of the things that we have been talking about over the last year is that it is simply not enough to call for better methods in the current framework we're sitting in. Some quantitative measures of university performance could play a useful role, and obviously there might not be altogether negative, if you like, motives behind the way in which these measures have been put together. However, there is a much greater need for us around the world to acknowledge the harms and problems of the ranking system we have, and then to try and end the undue power and influence of those rankings, particularly commercial rankings, and the impacts they have in higher education. We have worked on this for over a year now. We've had very heated debates, and we think that one of the key things that we need to do, and that's the reason that you are all here in this webinar, is to support policymakers and universities to recognize and encourage greater debate about the systematic negative effects of university rankings. We would like the media not to be so sensationalist about the rankings that exist for specific universities. We would like funding agencies not to use the standing in rankings as specific criterion for funding specific universities and specific projects. And fundamentally, we would like a critical stance when presenting rankings in promotional materials. I think we would also want to be saying that more than ever, there is a need to better harness the qualities of higher education as a whole, to respond to the urgent and serious challenges facing the world. As my colleagues have said, universities play a critical role in preparing policymakers of the future. And we have a critical role in standing together to make sure that all universities around the world can fulfill that critical role. We cannot let higher education simply be driven towards becoming a more homogenized and unequal market of winners and losers based on what we feel are arbitrary, dubious, and very simplistic criteria. We would therefore call for a set of actions. The first one that I have mentioned is awareness. I will hand now over to my colleague to talk about other methods, particularly thinking about different ways of evaluating universities and think about the ways in which we can do that.
Yeah, thank you very much for my colleagues have highlighted and discussed about the major challenges and problems regarding global university rankings. And we not only engage ourselves and also the community of university to be aware about the problems being outlined above. And at the same time, I think we have to think about repurposing about university in the global world and adopt better ways to assess and also the relative strength and the weakness of universities. And I don't think we have to shy away from performance review, but performance assessment should not be understood or interpreted as a form of mechanical and instrumental evaluation of performance by only making reference to ranking. So there are different forms of assessment or evaluation of university which can enhance further development and quality enhancement of university. We just highlight a few initiatives which deserve greater attention, like more than our rank and African quality rating mechanism, Universities of Netherlands expert group, and also coalition for advancing research assessment, etc. But there are plenty ways for assessing university, because I don't think we have to standardize about performance evaluations as such, because universities across different parts of the world will be founded with different purposes. So long as university, they establish themselves with a purpose based upon their vision and mission, they run their education for fitting the needs, not only the global needs, but also responding positively to the local and regional needs and serving the purpose of the individuals and family within the country would be supported. And even though we find a quick assessment of university performance, we must be very candid. The so-called world-class university being reviewed by world-leading tables, whether students enjoy excellent learning experience. The formation of university, the core business to us is to do good education. We care for student learning and helping our student learning to care. And I think the student dimension, the learning and also quality of learning, quality of teaching should be given more attention. If we stay on with the ranking that my colleagues has outlined, the problem being highlighted, will certainly drive people's behavior and shape people's behavior by putting more their energies and attention to research and publication for citation, which is more, appropriate for ranking. But if we think about more serious about student learning, then maybe we have to look for different other alternative for assessing university. And more importantly, we are facing a challenging world, a challenging time. In what way we can connect each other, work collaboratively for co-promoting university in support of the sustainable development goals, which would be more beneficial for all. Next slide, please. Another call from this group would be disengage from those practices that are extractive, exploitative, and non-transparent. And my colleagues has outlined about different forms of problem resulting from excessive reliance on global university table for measurement of university performance. So I think different form of disengagement from this sort of ranking would be preferred. So I hand over to the host.
Thanks, Joshua. In fact, it's Ellen to speak now. Over to you, Ellen.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. And I'm glad, welcome to this webinar. I expect in closing, I'd like to support everything that my colleagues have said, that we need a more holistic, equitable, and context-sensitive way of looking at higher education quality, of assessment and improvement, rather than one that is based on a single measure of excellence, with an idea that one size fits all around the world. We need to realize that excellence can be defined in many ways and depends on both the context and the user. Ministries of Education, national university associations, the national media, and other types of public organizations have a critical role in helping to develop and to promote alternative approaches to assess and value higher education. Their role in directing systematic change across higher education, enabling universities and other institutions of higher education to strive not just for their own improvement, but for the way in which higher education has a role in impact on society more widely, both locally, nationally, regionally, and globally. It's also worth noting that critical voices are rising, that this statement here by the UNU is part of a rising tide of criticism. Most notably, the US Secretary of State, Miguel Cardona, recently called rankings a joke, urging prestige to be conferred on colleges, and what he said, colleges breaking cycles of poverty, rather than those just assuming excellence. And a recent meeting of the BRICS associations, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, the ministers of education adopted a declaration proclaiming rankings skewed the values and priorities of universities, imposing indefensible costs on developing countries and detracting from the norms emphasizing cooperation, collaboration, sharing, and solidarity. The European Union led the way with setting up the U-Multi-Rank, which was mentioned by my colleague Kaho a few minutes ago, over 10 years ago. And more recently, we've seen statements by the European University Association and the universities of the Netherlands, in addition to well-publicized actions by individual universities. So there is this rising chorus of criticism and comment about rankings and recognition that finally recognition of the role and that they are playing in a negative way across society. And in this context, we urge governments, universities, students, and other public voices to turn away from using rankings to drive policy, strategy, funding, and choices. I urge you to look at our statement, which is the link to it is in the chat. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Ellen, and thank you to all of the members of the panel for the lucid and succinct presentation of this statement, which I think is an incredibly clear analysis of the problems associated with rankings, but it's also a real clear and strong call for protecting and promoting the role of universities in addressing the variety of social and ecological problems that we're facing globally, and particularly in the global south. So we've got time now for some questions from the audience. There is a chat box, a Q&A function on this Zoom link, which you can use to type in some questions. We already have one question from the audience. And I suppose it's a question that relates to the way in which students have to navigate the league tables that are presented to them. And what essentially presented to them is this notion that there are good universities and that there are bad universities. And that if you happen to end up getting a degree or studying at what might be perceived as being a bad university by virtue of them being either ranked poorly or perhaps even not ranked at all, this produces implications for that student. And the question is, well, what do we do about this? How should students who end up in universities that are either poorly ranked or not ranked at all respond and react to the message that is being sent out by these rankings? Who might like to take that question?
Well, let me try to respond. I think managing universities these days is really a challenging job, especially in the context that I've been working for in Asia. Asian families and individuals are very keen about education. They may save up their family income for supporting their kids for having higher education. So investment in education means a lot for family and individual, and I could fully understand about the anxiety for making choices based upon some form of public domain knowledge. One of the way that we discussed would be people may subscribe to those global league tables about university ranking. But having said that, we have to work very closely as educator with the like-minded people for collaboration in providing alternative views when we talk about success in universities. One way would be working closely with the alumni because they've gone through the great learning experience. Though we may say through the ranking, some universities are deemed rated as world-class, but to be very frank, we have to ask our students and alumni whether they have gone through world-class learning experience. And definitely, I think students can tell the truth. And so I think this is important to work with the student and also the alumni about the real and genuine reflection about their learning experience. If those experiences are genuinely good and excellent in helping individual for whole person development, I think that sort of real experience can carry currency for affecting people's choice, because their experience when spreading among the community and also their peers certainly would affect the way they think about what sort of university they go for. This is my quick response. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kaho. Anyone else want to respond? Akusua?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, David. Thank you, Kaho. I'm going to say that from where I sit in Ghana, and a lot of African parents and their wards are also extremely interested in education. As we said, it's an opportunity for social mobility, and it's a market. And I would say that when we go shopping and when we go to the market, we have to go with our eyes open, because those who are advertising a product will tell us all kinds of things. And these days we advise people, if you're buying a product, read what's on the product and read what it tells you the ingredients or the contents of that product are, because the marketers will tell you that it's the most amazing product. So, jumping off what Kaho said, if you're going to study, let's say, sociology or engineering or African studies, it's not so much only how important that university is as a whole, but where can you get the engineering or the African studies or the sociology that you are looking for as a consumer? So I would suggest as consumers, get in touch with the department, with the institute. I'm at an Institute of African Studies. I have had students who have come to study at this institute, which is one of the oldest on the continent as a decolonial space, who have had amazing experiences that they did not get in their own institutions, or they did not even have African studies at their own institutions, or they had them, but they were from a very colonized perspective. So the fact that the University of Ghana may not be high on the league tables, and you go to, I don't know, I'm not going to call out any other institution, does not mean that you will get a better education in what you're looking for. So as a consumer, you need to go shopping with your eyes open. You can go to university websites. I get emails from people all the time. I want to come and study at your university. Who's available? What are you teaching? Can I see your syllabus? These are important things that as consumers we need to do. And to, as we have tried to say, to remember that these very generic and global rankings are not telling us the picture. If someone says, well, I went to eat in this restaurant and the food was too spicy, so I'm going to give it 1 out of 5, but I'm somebody who's looking for spicy food, then that 1 out of 5 does not help me. So I hope that I've spoken to that a wee bit.
Great, thanks, Akusua. I think it's really important you making that distinction between advertising and marketing and having reliable information about universities, and your equation of rankings as a form of advertising is important, I think. But that also then begs the question as to how can students and parents and people working in governments get the information that they need to be able to make an informed choice and informed decisions as well. And so Marcelo, you've got your hand up. I wonder if you could also maybe reflect on that question, because it is important that people can have access to information that's reliable and accurate. Marcelo?
Yeah, yes, and not only that, I would bring the perspective from here, from Brazil or Latin America, and the point is that in many occasions, well, we just to mention, in Brazil we have only 20% of the students in the 18 to 24 years old cohort. Only 20% are attending higher education, and the universities which are public, which are usually the best ones in the ranking systems, like my university is among the first in Latin America, but it's almost impossible for any student for a poorer background to get in. Just to mention an example, in my university, 80,000 students apply for 3,000 places. So it's extremely competitive, and if you don't have a proper prior education, it's impossible to get in. So there are other issues that go towards these inequalities in higher education, and this is extremely important. So here in the market, there are universities all around the country, and probably what we should ask is how students decide which university are looking, and probably it's more the one who is nearby their houses, or the ones that they can afford. And for the market that we have here, the most important thing is having a certificate, and they not many people care about the ranking system, and it's just as important to have the diploma or something like that. So there are many dimensions on this issue that can be incorporated into our discussion that makes this kind of support or idea from families for which university students can go is very complex, and it's in many places the rankings don't even play a very important role at all.
Thank you, Marcelo. Ellen, you've got your hand up. Over to you.
Yeah, maybe just a small comment for people to keep in mind. The rankings generally, the numbers that we're interested in are really about the top 100. But there's over 20,000 universities according to the International Association of Universities. I mean, that's an awful lot of universities reduced down to 100. So it just makes the whole thing kind of silly as an exercise. And it ignores, and even when you get these kinds of surveys that are based on what people think, they're based upon the institutions that you know. And you only know the ones that you know. So you don't know the better ones that are offering expert or other types of specialist information or specialist studies, or they're based in the region, or they're dealing with other kinds of issues. You don't necessarily know them. So that's the first comment to make. The second one is that following on from Cajo's comment about alumni, it's really important that universities, and indeed the role of ministers and governments, get involved in a wider public communication, especially to employers and the labor market in general, because there is a tendency to fall back on very simplistic approaches to recruitment, or indeed universities themselves, very simplistic approaches to recruiting both academic faculty or indeed students themselves. And we really need to understand that there are what is going on in the whole issue around rankings and the way in which they actually reduce the range of options for people and indeed for employers. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. It's worth also just maybe mentioning from a previous webinar that one of the comments from the audience was in reference to this kind of ideology that is based in the ranking system and which is kind of connected very strongly to this idea of marketization, and with that, this idea that there will be competition and that there will be winners and losers in that competition, applies in many other sectors as well. And we get that also in the health sector in some parts of the world where hospitals are ranked according to how well they perform, and same with medical schools. And what's curious is that when surveys I've done of the general public in terms of what they value when they seek a hospital, very rarely do people say that they're looking for, that they look at rankings or they're looking for quantitative measures of quality. What they treasure more than anything else is a hospital that is local and a hospital that they can trust. And what they see in the system is a system that encourages a mistrust, because they are thinking about, is this a good hospital or a bad hospital? Can I trust it or can I not trust it? And that creates a sense of insecurity and anxiety, which of course always compounds the problem, the health problem that they have. So this seems to be a wider social phenomenon affecting not just the higher education sector, but other sectors as well. And I just wanted, I see Akusua and Kao, you've got your hands up, but can I just bring in another question, which relates to the UN system more broadly? And I guess the question is really about what is the role, not just of governments in trying to fix the problems associated with global university rankings, but given that we are looking at a globalized higher education sector, what might be the role of the UN in playing a role in trying to promote a more appropriate global response to what is happening in the higher education sector? We are part of the UN, but we don't have a particular mandate for the higher education sector, but there may be other UN agencies that could be playing a more positive role. So any comments on that as well would be great. But let me hand over first to Akusua, and then Kaho, and then Ellen.
Thanks, David. I just wanted to go back quickly to your question on where one could find information, because I'm not sure we've completely dealt with that. And I think, as to use the word consumers, we just have to do a little bit more homework. When my own children were younger and were preparing to go into university, they ended up going into different universities. One went into a large sort of research university, the other one went into a small college, because these are two different people who had different goals and were going into different disciplines. So together with them, we just had to do the work of mining the websites of these institutions. Where we found email addresses, we contacted people. In terms of rankings, one was much higher ranked than the other, but as parents and they themselves, they were ultimately very satisfied with their experiences and what they got out of these different institutions because of what they were looking for as individuals, right? And both them and us as parents, we because I myself I'm an academic, I could say, oh, I've heard of this person, or I know this person. Let's shoot them an email and ask these questions about what your own needs are. So I would say that there's work that's involved, and some of that information is not even about the university. It's about the community that it's in. It's about the country. It's does the individual, as Marcelo said, it's also about how much income do you have. Does it have a scholarship for what you need? Perhaps it's looking for people who are interested in the creative arts, and there happens to be a scholarship for 10 students next year. Is this something that's important to me? So we will have to spend more time doing that research ourselves, and just relying. I mean, I do know a number of young people whose parents just relied on these rankings. It's like, wow, amazing, my child has gotten into this university, and the child had a terrible experience because it was not the kind of context that they needed. To your other question, one of our colleagues in sharing, we talked about these other rankings that are available, not rankings, other data sets, if you like. So for example, for a student on the African continent, I would say definitely go and look at the African Quality Rating Mechanism that the Association of African Universities has put together. Go to sites like Codestria. See, again, it's and the UN's and those of us who are part of this process and who are interested in it also need to continue to put pressure on the associations and the organizations that we are involved in that can provide links to these other sites that provide information, and to the extent that people can be available for further communication and don't want to be inundated with 2,000 messages, we can help to start maybe putting together some not too detailed and overwhelming, but frequently asked questions, documents that people can go to with some of the major questions that are coming out of the conversations that we've been having. Thank you.
Thank you, Akosua. Kaho.
Yeah, thanks, David, for raising a very important question at the global level. In what way we could work with UN organizations? I think UN would be a good platform, but what platform we can identify? But anyway, I think university with a like minds and can come together for collaboration, for forming some form of alliance, for promoting about alternative view of university assessment. And I think this is extremely important to highlight the public good function of universities. And universities should not be conforming to a certain kind of standard through the global ranking, and making people and parents and government and different stakeholders be aware about the role differentiation should be supported among universities. And not every university should be comprehensive. As Alan has mentioned, some universities across regions and countries will be very specialized and serving its own mission and vision, but they fit for purpose. So if we have more leaders from university could work together with alliance for promoting the voices for position about university, repurposing about university education. I think the synergy being established and also the voices putting together would make another alternative. I don't think we can stay away from ranking, to be very frank. But in what way we can offer alternative perspective for parents and different stakeholders when they turn with university, especially highlighting the important role of university in wider engagement, community services, and education for service. Thank you.
Thanks, Kaho. I've got Ellen next, and then Carolyn.
Hi. Yes, just a very quick comment on this. First of all, it's important to recognize that UNESCO has been involved in this issue since 2011. It hosted a major conference in Paris on that, and then published a book on the issue of rankings and accountability, uses and misuses, and that is still around. So UNESCO has been a driving force in this whole issue and doesn't accept and continues to this day is not a supporter or promoter of the idea of rankings. My other comment would be is that we're really talking about public data and the use of public data as a public good. There is, rankings flourish in a circumstance where there is an absence of internationally agreed public data. We don't have common definitions. We don't have a data source. And consequently, we now have the privatization of public data. The European Union has made some steps in this regard. I mentioned earlier the U-Multi-Rank. It is now establishing the European Observatory of Higher Education, which will bring together a range of different types of projects that it's had about higher education data and related educational data. I think UNESCO could play a role in this regard. This is a big enterprise. It's probably not something they want to take on because it is such a big enterprise, but certainly along with the EU, OECD, and so on. But this is really what we're talking about, is the use of public data, of public data for private purposes, and basically then selling it on for consultancy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. And maybe I was just make the point that I was quite shocked to learn just how much money is made out of these commercialized ranking systems. It's a huge amount of money that's being made, and essentially this is money that is being sucked out of the higher education sector.
Well, essentially,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, I mean, essentially, we all need data to understand, make strategic choices, and make decisions about what we're doing. And the range of comparative or wide-ranging international data is fairly limited, or what. And there is a consultancy now. I would say that rankings provide the front door into a much wider business as the back end. It's a much more that's really where the money is at.
Yeah, and say more about that, Ellen. What do you mean by that backdoor industry?
Well, I mean, the rankings are there, but the real business strategy is around the selling of data and consultancy around that. So how do you do better? How do you improve? How do you compete? The whole razzmatazz around it, but there's a huge consultancy business off the back of it. Governments use it as much as universities use it. It's both high-ranking universities, mid-ranking universities, developing countries as well as developed countries. It's a huge market, and it's really that basis of selling data.
Yeah, great. I'm just conscious that we have about 4 minutes left, so I will hand over to Carolyn to make a comment, and then see if Marcelo's got a final comment to make, but we'll probably then bring this to a close at the top of the hour. Carolyn.
Thank you very much for all the comments of my colleagues, but also the questions from the audience. And I'm sure there are many more questions. Well, one of the things that I just wanted to say is that it's we're in a situation where these rankings have emerged in a globalized context. And one of the aspects of globalization that's most notable is the speed of change. Now, just because the speed of the predominance of these rankings has happened incredibly quickly and seems to have consolidated, doesn't mean that we can't change it. So coming back to the question from our colleague in Korea, yes, we are all working on this, and we've all come together from around the world to start this debate because we think there's something that's wrong that needs to be addressed. Responding to the last two speakers, I am speaking from two of the very highly ranked organizations in London, and I studied in another of the most highly ranked organizations. One reflection I would make is, yes, I definitely think that debate needs to be had in the highly ranked institutions. The London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, largely driven by students, is actually starting to address these issues and actually starting to try and decolonize, but that hasn't come from the academic leadership, that has come from students. So the student body has pushed a highly ranked organization. So student bodies can be highly important as well. And obviously academics, individual academics in those institutions are under huge pressures as well. It creates all sorts of perverse incentives on individual academics to exclude Southern partners out of citations, to actually prioritize their names in research grants compared to Southern partners. It has very perverse incentives for individual academics. And obviously that dynamic exists, but that doesn't mean we can't change it, which is one of the reasons that all of us are here, and one of the reasons the UNU has started this. So I just want to finish my comment with saying, just because this situation exists, we have all come together because we think that we need to do something about it. And that can come from everyone, not just academics. I think all of us fundamentally believe that universities have a significant public responsibility, and that marketizing universities as a whole is extremely destructive for democracy globally. And we're all wanting to shift that discussion a little bit. Or certainly I'm in part of this on that basis.
Great, thank you, Caroline. We are at the top of the hour, and I think you ended on a really important point, which is touching on what was said earlier about there being a rising tide of criticism about these rankings, a rising level of awareness of their harms, and although it's rising, it's not risen enough for change to happen on a wide level. And we're hoping very much that this statement by the independent expert group that we've convened will play some role towards promoting change. But we are reliant on everyone picking up on this issue and also using the statement as much as they can. This is a statement that is now in the public domain, and we see this very much as a statement that can and should be used by anyone concerned about the future of higher education and about the role that universities can play in addressing the many social, political, and ecological challenges that we face. So with that, I'd just like to thank the panelists for their amazing contribution to this webinar and for their contribution to the production of this statement. There is a recording of this webinar that will be available on YouTube, so please do share the link with others. And please do disseminate the statement to others as well. So with that, once again, thank you to the panelists, thank you to the audience, and thank you to my colleagues who've helped to organize this webinar. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good morning. Good afternoon. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, David, for sharing.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.